Today on the podcast, we're going to speak about spiritual bypassing, which has become popular, especially in the last 30 years. It was first coined by John Welwood back in 1984. John Welwood, for those who don't know, is a psychotherapist, popular psychotherapist, wrote many popular books on the relationship between psychotherapy, Buddhism, Eastern spirituality in general. But spiritual bypassing has become, in the modern day, more popularized by Robert Augustus Masters. And both you and I are familiar with his work and his popular book, aptly named Spiritual Bypassing. And for those who don't know, spiritual bypassing, what it is it is the use of spiritual practices and beliefs to suppress pain, unresolved wounds, and developmental needs. So it's a pretty complex topic to talk about, but a lot of people, especially, and this may, when you think about it, it in some sense applies a lot to Westerners, because, a lot of us are only, in the evolution of culture, have only been introduced to Eastern spirituality in the last, 200 years, and,
Yes.
and really the last 100 years more so. And so this also applies to the different cognitive styles also of the East and the West, where Western cognition is more geared towards individualism. So there are certain things about Eastern spirituality which, if you're not trained or you're not knowledgeable enough, you may become a spiritual bypasser. Now, when we say the use of spiritual practices and beliefs to suppress all this pain and these unresolved wounds, we need to re-emphasize that the wrong use of these spiritual practices and beliefs. So, and this is very common, as you and I know, through especially paths such as Advaita Vedanta, where people, if they're not schooled enough in Vedanta, then they can commit spiritual bypassing. And I need to emphasize that we all have spiritual bypass once upon a time, Easterners and Westerners. We've all done that to a certain degree, where we will use our spiritual practice as kind of a scaffold to hold ourselves up to an elevated position without dealing with certain psychological problems that we may have. And what a lot of people discount is that they think that it's only been psychotherapy that's, and psychology that's developed these things about dealing with pain and so forth and so on. But as you and I know, they're intrinsic, especially within Buddhism and Hinduism. There is this, this wheel of samsara framework, this psychology, which we'll talk about, further in the podcast, where we have samskaras, vasanas, and karma. The problem is for the Vedanta student, or the student of yoga or Samkhya or even Buddhism, is they may not have learned that. They may only learn the practice of self-inquiry or satipatthana, mindfulness. They may have only learned these practices, but have not read the whole, the Buddhist sutras or the Hindu scriptures. They may have not read these, and they may not understand that there's actually a psychological component to all of this, And so then we think as Westerners, Western psychotherapy has something to offer, and it does, but it's not the first game in town. There is a Eastern psychological approach, but conveniently that's ignored for whatever reason, and we've just taken on this idea of self-inquiry or mindfulness without the exploration of our own unresolved pain.
Yes, a lot of people are not aware of that wheel of samsara framework today.
No.
And that is actually a very important component of the Advaita Vedanta practice. And people bypass that and they just apply the mindfulness practice and self-inquiry and things like that. So they kind of miss out kind of big portion of Advaita Vedanta study.
Exactly. Even like Buddhism, like when you study Vipassana, you have to understand samskaras, vasanas, karma. And like people just that go to a 10-day retreat, they don't really learn that a lot, or they haven't read a lot about Vipassana, or they haven't read a lot about the Buddhist teachings. And then they go through the 10-day Goenka Vipassana retreat, and they come out pretty much the same person as who they went in as, So obviously there are unique cases where people will have transformative experiences for sure, but in general, I don't think a lot of people do, because they don't have a framework before they go in. And so when we talk about, since we are talking about the Wheel of Samsara framework, intrinsic within Hinduism, Buddhism, you have that. And so when we say samskaras, we're talking about the subliminal images or mental impressions that we have deep within our subconscious. Samskaras is basically, you could translate in English as the subconscious. And that is basically the storehouse of all of our personality, our psychological framework, which fuels our vasanas. And vasanas are our habitual tendencies, or latent tendencies in habitual ways, which then fuels our karma, our actions, so how we act in the world, and also our unconscious actions, which is something that a lot of people don't talk about. Karma is, even in some sense, more related to unconscious actions too, how you react unconsciously to certain situations when you're not conscious of what's happening. And that's all fueled by the store or the basement of the samskaras. And so you have this Wheel of Samsara framework, which from the Hindu and Buddhist scriptures keeps you locked into this wheel of samsara, where you're locked into this sense of a jiva, which keeps you coming back life after life after life, because you're not, in a sense, cleaning out the basement, So to clean out the basement, this is why we practice Vipassana. This is why we practice Zen open awareness meditation. This is why we practice self-inquiry. As Ramana Maharshi said, self-inquiry will burn out all of your samskaras, all of your vasana, if it's practiced earnestly and properly too, which needs to be made a point. Because a lot of people practice self-inquiry, vichara, in an incorrect manner. You know what I mean? It becomes more of an intellectual head game for some people. Who is the one that wants to eat this cake and blah blah blah, which then this is actually not the correct way to practice self-inquiry. You're trying to isolate the I, but you're not trying to make it an intellectual game about, who wants to eat this lamington, or, you know what I mean? It's about bringing you back into that natural law, that what the Sanatana Dharma is in Hinduism. So, that we have that framework. And
then what would you say that in samskaras, so it's a subconscious mind?
Yeah.
What's in the subconscious mind?
It's all of the impressions and experiences we've had. Even for example, you and I can go and do something today, right? And we only focus on sort of what our conscious attention is happening. Even whatever we're focusing on our conscious attention, that'll produce a samskara, an impression deep within your subconscious. But also everything else will too. You know what I mean? So there may be something in your periphery. This is what the subconscious is designed to do. Subconscious is designed to accumulate experience and help you work out, to help you basically navigate through life efficiently. That's the beauty of the subconscious, actually. This is why when we study, for example, you may be studying all day and you can't get this problem. But you've studied all day, and then all you need to do is sleep and let the subconscious do what it does. And usually you wake up on the next day and you have that idea or that thing has come to you effortlessly without the prefrontal cortex or the sense of I trying to solve the problem. The subconscious does it. So that's the beauty of the subconscious. But the problem with it is it accumulates all experience.
Doesn't decide what's good or bad. There is no such idea for subconscious. Yeah. Hence
why the yogis and the sadhus go up into the mountains and they try to, in some sense, purge all of the samskaras that they have accumulated through life. So and usually the samskaras that have the most power are the ones that have kind of shaped our reality or formed our opinion of certain things in the world. And they're the ones that hold a lot of weight they're the ones that our vasanas are so strong, right? So you may have had an experience and say it's a traumatic experience. That traumatic experience may dwell deep because of the experience association with the people, say if it's your family or friends or your loved one or someone that you love, it may have been a negative experience, that will produce a strong samskara that will maybe influence your vasanas going forward. And in some sense, and this is what they explain in Vipassana, is the problem with that is that though that traumatic experience happened, that should not form your opinion or your perspective of the world going forward. But what happens, and this is the problem with the samskaras, is that that traumatic experience may confuse your perspective of other people and certain events, which are completely disconnected
from your experience.
Exactly. That past experience was years ago, right? Why is that forming your opinion of what's happening now? And that's the trick of the mind, of the samskaras, right? But we're not thinking deeply enough about that, and we're not trained efficiently enough in meditation and also the philosophy of meditation, which is important too. So that's the big problem with samskaras, because all of that experience is affecting our vasanas. And
yes, when we don't know how to make discernment, then we just react out of that subconscious mind without discernment.
Without
yes,
discernment, yeah.
So that, like we just mentioned, whatever you experienced in the past, which is traumatic or negative experience, then you apply that the same reaction to circumstance that you are in now, which is completely disconnected from your past experience. But because we haven't get to train ourselves to catch that moment just before you react, so we just kind of automatically project our views on present moment from the past experience.
Which is causing, you're accumulating more karma in doing that, because you're unconsciously acting and also acting consciously to each and every situation based on that, which is how you accumulate this karmic stock, which develops in the samskaras, which is what, is apparently lives over life to life, because it's wound up in the idea of jiva, but you haven't exposed those deep samskaras that are affecting your reality. And meditation and vipassana and self-inquiry and all that, those practices which we depend on are actually supposed to expose those. They're not supposed to suppress them even more. And that's what what has happened with spiritual bypassing, because they're beginning to suppress those even more because we don't understand that framework of understanding. That a lot of people are going into these practices without this science, this Eastern science and Eastern psychology that is wound up within, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. They don't understand that. So then those samskaras that are still there, regardless of what practice you think you're doing to avoid those, you know what I mean? When from that perspective, you're supposed to lean into a little bit of that pain to alleviate it. So you're supposed to bring light. So this is like Jungian, right? You're supposed to put the light of consciousness on that pain to resolve that unresolved wound on a psychological, on a jiva level. And so when we're just using we'll use self-inquiry as an example. When we're just using self-inquiry to put ourselves in a state of awareness, with even though the turbulence and the vrittis are just like a storm, if you're not trained enough and you're not skilled enough, you'll just continue to suppress those samskaras, and they'll end up like these dark things in the corner of the basement with dust all over them that you've never attended to. And what happens, and we've seen this with people who do practice spirituality, is they emotionally get triggered very easily, or they react unconsciously and out of character. It's not their character to be an a-hole or someone like this, right? But because they've suppressed so much, it comes out the wrong way.
I think for a lot of spiritual practitioners, they tend to have this negative connotation about mind, right? Like mind is something that has its own intelligence, and it just works itself So it's something that you don't have to pay attention. They just put it away like that. And what they think is that they need to concentrate on self-inquiry and mindfulness practice. So they skip looking within deeply inside themselves. But again, that's a wrong way to go about. Like they just judge mind as something we don't need it, or it's negative, or things like that. And I'm a spiritual, for example, I'm a spiritual practitioner, and I should focus on Advaita Vedanta. Yes, practice meditation, self-inquiry, mindfulness, etc. But that's, like you said, that's in long term. I think it creates a lot of psychological problem. And what Ken Wilber was kind of mocking a lot of spiritual teachers who have these tendencies, right? Yeah,
it's true. Because a lot of it, this is where you come with the, this is where you hear about the promiscuous guru or the teacher who is a bit of an a-hole and this and that. They may have not dealt with a lot of things on the psychological level. And then a lot of people will argue, what about Ramana Maharshi and these sorts of great sages who just, they went away from society. There's a different element here, right? When you're leaving society, you can deal with a lot of that very easily because you're not engaged with society. But when you're still engaged with people and you're in a social setting, there's an element of psychology that's always on. And so if you have not investigated that, and if you're not conscious of your own samskaras and your own negative tendencies, or your repressed pain and your unresolved wounds, then that's going to come out unconsciously in a very bad way, because that's how the samskaras operate. The samskaras don't care about your social well-being or your friendships and stuff like that. It's designed just to give you impulses to deal with reality. These reactions we have, or these tendencies we have, these vasanas, are fueled by the sensations of the subconscious. It doesn't have an obligation to you to decide whether it's good or bad for you. So you see that this happen a lot with a lot of spiritual teachers and stuff like that, and that's actually why this is actually why Ken Wilber was saying that even one of his Zen teachers said to him, which was really remarkable, said that it's very important that, and we're talking about Zen here, we're talking about a path that there are elements where it abstains from sex, or they're celibate, and there's other there's other parts of Zen where the abbot may have a wife,
family,
and a family. So, but this was a teacher on the other side of the coin, a celibate, and he said to Ken, it's very important that people go out and have sex before they get on this path. And the reason why he was saying that is because there is a certain psychological dynamic that we haven't unlocked in our mind without having that intimate connection with someone else. There's a certain psychology that actually helps, especially from an adult's perspective. Adults are the only ones that should be having sex. It helps the cognitive growth, So the cognition grows. So it was a really remarkable point he made. And it was, Ken was a bit dumbfounded by it, because he was like, this guy's celibate, but he's telling people, it's probably best you go out and get it on, you know what I mean? But he was saying that well-intentioned, because it helps resolve a lot of things psychologically that as that teacher said, he said, some of my students here won't access that deep element because they have never had sex, because they started being a monk from a young age, and so they're probably never going to have sex and never going to have that intimate connection with someone else. And we are human all in a sense. For each and every one of us, there is a longing to be with someone, that's a deep longing that you could say is linked to the personality, but it's something also very primal, right? Like it's...
Yeah, we always want to get loved by someone, right?
Yeah.
Getting taken care of by somebody.
Exactly. And having that connection with someone. And so there is that. And so there is that cognitive element. And so that was, a really important what he said to Ken Wilber, because a lot of people are jumping into, especially Eastern spirituality, and they're trying to suppress even, sexual urges and things like that, or creative urges. And, part of spiritual bypassing also is developmental needs. So the suppression of developmental needs, so on a personal level, so how you are developing psychologically as on a personal level, And so a lot of even spiritual teachers are still developing too, you know what I mean? They're even though they may not admit this, they're refining their understanding of the teachings, their craft, and they can also articulate it better for the students. I myself have experienced this, as you know, over the 12 years of doing this, going from gibbering 12 years ago to speaking how I, in some sense how I can speak now. I'm not calling myself a spiritual teacher or anything, but you know what I mean? So there are developmental things that actually naturally occur, regardless of, your opinion of how it should be, So the problem from that perspective is then when you have those latent urges that are probably, in some sense, not even tied to the personality, probably in Taoism what we would call the Li, that organic pattern you have, is you need to sort of let that shine a little bit, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make you a lesser person, you know what I mean? You're just following whatever that urge is,
Yeah, the people have very strong idea of a person who spiritual.
Yeah.
Like, you're not supposed to have intimate sexual relationship with somebody, or you're not supposed to go out and do things, or they categorize so strongly, especially in that field, and which actually counterproductive to your real spiritual practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It suppresses more and more, and in the end, you kind of blocking your own potentiality and the possibility as to even to become more spiritual individual that you want to become.
Well, a lot of the negative connotation with sex comes from people thinking that it's just related to the primal and animal aspect of the human being, when they're missing out on the whole emotional element, the emotional center, because it's linked to the emotional center as well, about having an intimate connection, where we can have an intimate connection as humans with a partner, which is somewhat different than how dogs have sex, right? Like you don't usually see the male dog hanging around and raising the family and, and so forth and so on. So we have to really think about that a little bit more in detail and with a lot more critical thinking about it, like instead of just saying it's just related to the animal sphere and the Muladhara chakra and things like that. There's a lot more going on there. But that's, sex is only one element, right? So it's creative needs, as I said, like you may have an urge to be a musician or this and that. And though you can see the truth in that, that being a musician doesn't define, it will never define who you truly are. Yeah. But it's something that it's just an urge that you have to do. It's like an itch you have to scratch. And it's not a matter of overthinking about it. And this is one of the things that is related to spiritual bypassing, because when we get into mindfulness and self-inquiry, and even, we haven't spoke about this, but even when we look in Taoism and we talk about Tai Chi practitioners, or people who practice Qigong or Neigong or anything, is they can even spiritual bypass, because they become they think about everything in detail, and they miss the point that it's not about overthinking about everything. The overanalyzing of things will keep you in this, as Alan Watts said, this stone Buddha. You become a stone Buddha, where your dynamic life is disappeared. You become a stone Buddha. You're lifeless, in a sense. And as we know, especially through Zen Buddhism, the master is always teaching you you don't ever want to become a stone Buddha. You want to, the whole idea of koans and this and that is to be spontaneous and be immediate, but to have appropriacy in each and every situation. So as you were saying, there's like this, people develop this image of what a spiritual person should be, which according to them is a stone Buddha. There should be a stone Buddha, an emotionless being with no, humor, no sort of like love or empathy or compassion for life. And as you and I know from being around great teachers and learning from them, they're completely opposite to that. But this is developed in the world and I think it's through this spiritual bypassing that a lot of people are doing, especially from the Western perspective, where people think that I should just be completely like stone, not react to anything. And non-reaction is an important thing, but reacting in the we're talking here not reacting to worldly things, but reacting to just the immediate reality around you.
Yeah, well, that's why there's saying that Gautama, the Buddha, was enlightened when he got out of that strong sadhana. And once he had that milky soup that was given by a little girl or something. Yeah. And when he actually stopped the strict sadhana, that's the moment that he was enlightened.
Exactly. So all of the analyzing and all of the ideas and the perception he had of what it is to be an enlightened being, or what it is to be enlightened or a spiritual person, had evaporated. So I think a lot of people, especially you and I, we notice this when we see those really strange comments on YouTube and that people write when they're emotionally triggered and stuff like that, especially about the content that you and I make. And it's really strange because as we've had friends, they go, how come spiritual people are so negative and so like, so opinionated? What's all that about? Isn't spirituality supposed to be like Zhuangzi, supposed to be that free and easy wandering mentality? Like, why are people arguing in the comments section? It's kind of weird, right? Because that's, again, you have your own personal agenda, but you also probably suffer from spiritual bypassing. If you have had a negative reaction to, especially the content that you and I are making, because we're just exploring Eastern spirituality in its purest form, and you see this where people get very angry, like you should be doing this and that, like, as if there is a way that you should do things. Like there's a template. And this is related to this kind of role mentality that you have like in Confucianism, right? Like you should live up to this role. And as we know, the spiritual teacher is, well, as Osho said, is politically incorrect. If you're a politically correct spiritual teacher, then you are affected by social morality, which is a construct. Eastern spirituality is amoral. We know this. It's amoral. It doesn't abide by any external social morality. There are internal moral obligations that you have which will affect the way that you are in the world. But there's no ways of like, you should do this and you should do that and so forth and so on, especially when we look at it from the Taoist perspective, because Taoism, Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi being completely amoral and actually poking fun at moralists like Confucius. And so this has happened where, especially Westerners, have projected this moral idea onto Eastern spirituality. And we've had this with friends before where we have sort of a close friend, and he would say certain things to me as if I should be a certain way. Oh, he's like this. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, there's no like, you are confusing Eastern spirituality with maybe Christianity or Catholicism. You're confusing the two. And even I would say Christianity has been overly too influenced with this sense of morality, this sense of sin and so forth and so on. When we talk about amorality, we're talking about just the way nature is, without a human idea of how nature is.
Yeah, a lot of people, I guess, can misunderstand the amoral is like immoral.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the point here.
No.
Amoral means that just following how natural things flow, basically.
The natural law.
Yes, without any preconceived idea or judgment or idea that's influenced by society to judge what's right or wrong and things like that.
Yeah.
Because that's what actually got us to the situation where we are now, basically, social conflict and whatnot.
Yep.
Yes, so amoral is completely the kind of opposite from immoral way of thinking, like kind of concept.
Exactly. Because amorality is choosing a way of non-interference and not superimposing your agenda in the world. Because you've explored yourself enough to know that who is this person who is trying to project these ideas and these beliefs that I have onto the world. Like, who am I to do that? Like, that's, as Jiddu Krishnamurti would say, that's actually an act of violence when you're trying to influence the world one way or the other. Like he said, if you call yourself a Hindu, Jew, Muslim, black or white, or so forth and so on, you're actually causing violence in the world because you are a proponent of separation. You're causing this separation amongst humanity, which actually doesn't exist. It's the samskaras in our mind that are being, they're just pouring out of ourselves unfiltered, and we're not doing the internal work, Yeah,
and also I think that over-analyzing things is a big part of our actually conscious mind, I think. Like, we always like to analyze things, especially this day and age, that since that all digital device been very developed, and we like to categorize everything, and we like to analyze everything to put into categories and whatnot. And that applies to the spiritual practice as well. And again, that is big part of a spiritual bypassing. That we judge what's right or wrong, and coming from moral perspective or whatever it might be, it's more analytical mindset. And to make a discernment between like what's right or wrong and try to act out of what's right all the time is causing a lot of internal conflict. Yeah.
Because you've created your own laws, your own morality that you're supposed to live by. And this is why in Zen they say someone who's acting like that, they stink of Zen. So they're too pious, they're too gooey. You know what I mean? They're trying to live up to an image. Like, let's use Christ as an image, right? You're trying to live up to an image of Christ, which in some sense is an image it's too good, like it's too goody two-shoes. Life isn't. When we look at nature doesn't have a sense of morality. There's an organic law, but there's not a sense of morality. Morality came later. It's like the evolution of the Sanatana Dharma in Hinduism was based on natural law about how nature works. And then slowly down the path of Hinduism, as we evolved, clever people implemented more, moral obligations and things that we had to live up to, so forth and so on down the line, right? And this also affected Buddhism as well. And so we have that, but the thing is that if we went with the amoral approach, where we're not trying to cause conflict with one another, we're not trying to promote our own agenda, what we're trying to do actually is to get rid of all of our agendas and try to release all that so we can actually become one and understand each other without this false sense of separation, whether it's nationalistic, religious, gender, or race. Those four ones are usually the big ones of separation. If we got rid of all that, because that's all illusionary, those boundaries, then we start to really make progress as a human race, and then we start to. But that can only happen, when we start to do the internal work, to look into the basement, to see what fuels our emotional reactions and reactions to life, and then we can live in that's actually when they say how do we live in world peace, that's how we live in world peace. It's not as utopian as what you think it is. It's more so life is still normal, but you've got rid of your habit of promoting and superimposing your own agenda on the world, trying to influence other people and trying to, or reacting to certain situations and so forth and so on. This is why in spirituality, one of the core elements is vairagya, is non-reactiveness and also renunciation of worldliness, because that allows you to keep your mind clear of all of this BS that we see going on, that the news media and that, broadcast to the world, where we can eliminate that and start to work on the deep levels. Because we need these people, in the world. We need these people to be working on the deep levels, because otherwise you've just got people who are focusing on the news and focusing on conflict 24/7, and they are confused and they think that that's the actual reality. I always find it strange when people write to me, what about all these problems and this and that in the world? You're seeing like a slither of the world. You're seeing, like, in some sense, even just a slither of what's happening in America. When if you look at it in the rest of the world, there's a lot of good stuff and great stuff happening, a lot of positivity in the world, a lot of people doing good things. But the news media, they don't care about that. They care about what causes ratings. And then that also articulates and exposes a human flaw, that humans are attracted to drama because they're attracted to their own vrittis in their mind. They're attracted to the whirlpool of noise in their mind. So they are seeking noise in the external world, And so then we have the world we live in, where we need the people to be working on the deep samskaras. We need to allow these vrittis to subside, so the lake, to use yoga terminology, becomes reflective and transparent, the waters of the mind, so we can see directly into our true nature.
Yeah.
But we can't have that if we're just attracted to drama and noise all the time.
Again, looking into deeper level, which is our subconscious mind, is first and foremost step that actually we all need to take.
Yes.
And what happens to the vasanas, that once we get into our subconscious mind, then vasanas is like innate tendency?
Latent tendency.
Latent tendency.
Yeah. So that it begins to transform them.
Yeah.
That's the idea of the Wheel of Samsara framework, right? So if you're transforming the samskaras through meditation and becoming conscious of that, then that affects your vasanas. And then eventually you become, as they say, a karmaless being. You don't produce any more karma. And that's actually when you can get onto the higher levels that we often talk about on this podcast, where we go through the dissolution of I, because this all happens when all of that psychology begins to thin out. And that's a big thing in spiritual bypassing, because people aren't going through that process. They're just going straight to the teachings of Ramana, for example, and just practicing vichara, like self-inquiry, without looking in the samskaras and thinking that. But they have all these problems going on, right? These social problems and so forth and so on, these problems with people that are causing a lot of vritti, a lot of noise. The mind stuff is just, going, the turbulence of the mind is strong because the samskaras are still like beating, the pulse is beating. And so you can't have that transparent mind that we're looking for, that crystal clear mind, which, allows you then to feel the sense of Atman or Purusha within yourself. And so when we begin to practice the samskaras, then you'll see that your tendencies and your habits those patterns begin to thin out for whatever reason. You know what I mean? Well, we can understand it to a certain degree, right? If the subconscious is the power base of the mind, if you begin to resolve these certain conflicts you have within the subconscious, or you put the light of consciousness on the shadow, to use Jungian terminology, the shadow basically being the samskaras, then those dark tendencies, not dark as in negative, dark as in not conscious, then you'll begin to bring light to that and then expose that, which then frees that from your mind. You've resolved that dark aspect of your shadow or your subconscious, which then obviously affects the way that you behave in the world, right? So if you have, as we were mentioning earlier, if you had a traumatic experience when you were younger, which influenced the way that you reacted to certain situations, which are completely different, but that's the role of the samskara. But if you have put light on that dark tendency and explored that traumatic experience and how that had affected you through contemplation and meditation, then that's going to change the way that your habits and your tendencies going forward, the way that you behave in the world, which then you won't accumulate any karmic stock because you're not reacting from that place to life, So
Yeah, we need to apply our self-inquiry practice within that framework, not just practicing mindfulness and self-inquiry just from sitting meditation without any framework. That almost like, I don't know, it almost looks like it might go nowhere, really.
It can go nowhere. It really, well, we've seen evidence of that.
Yeah,
right?
you just repeat things without substantial results within your psychological state. I think.
Because you see that with people that do practice, and then you may say something to them which they disagree with, and then their reaction is very, strange. Like they may, be very opinionated. Again, a clear red flag that someone hasn't made a lot of spiritual progress is when they're very opinionated, and they have a lot of firm views of how the world should be. This is a dead giveaway that someone hasn't made any spiritual progress. And we've seen this in spiritual places that you and I go to, where people may practice these certain practices, and then next minute they're very righteous and opinionated, and you think, no, that's all supposed to have thinned out, because your understanding of the world is a lot deeper. You've overcome yourself, and you've also overcome, in a certain sense, the drama of the world, because that drama is only propagated by other people who have drama in their mind. That's how it's, and opinionated people. So when we begin to work on that, and for example, if we look at Vipassana as a science of dealing with the samskaras, is when we practice, like one of the core elements of Vipassana is Anapanasathi, so the awareness of that respiration. And the reason why the Buddha taught this was because when we focus on the breath and the mind begins to settle, so when the prefrontal cortex begins to downregulate and you're getting back into more of the unconscious sensations of the body, where actually the subconscious and that reside, especially in the hot cognition, is you begin to feel this at the root level, the sensorium, so the sensory matrix of our body. And so you feel these impulses that actually, according to Buddhism, are the samskaras. The sensations are the samskaras. So what you're feeling in our mind when our subconscious, subconscious or our samskaras are operating, is a habit or a tendency or a thought, but that in a sense is just a sensation felt in the mind, right? It's a sensation felt in the mind. It's how we feel sensations in our consciousness. It's the same from, especially a Buddhist perspective, it's the same sensation if I stand on your toe. Your toe's going to have a certain sensation if I stand on your toe, right? But this is a sensation from the sensory matrix, in the same sense as the toe, but we feel it as our habits and our tendencies, which influence our actions. And this is what samskaras are. So in Vipassana, the reason they tell you to focus on Anapanasathi, awareness of breath, and the reason why you focus on your senses of the body, is to dig into the samskaras. You see, that's the whole science behind it. And so the belief is that the more you focus then on the senses in your body, the more you're transforming latent things that you've never may have dealt with.
Yeah, more physically you become sensitive.
Yes.
You become sensitive inwardly as well.
Yes. Exactly. And so you're dealing with those things. And people may think, oh, well, that's completely, how is that related? Well, that's the way that it's taught. I mean, the belief is that the samskaras are related to the sensorium of the body, because that's in some sense where the subconscious is felt. It's felt as a deep sensory response to life within our mind. In the same sense as our body feels a deep sensory response to when it sees a lion. Your body knows that there's something not right here. There's a lion there, and then 2 minutes from now you could be afternoon brunch, morning brunch, I should say, for that lion. So, but in the same sense, right? So, in Vipassana, their whole focus was on getting into those samskaras, because they knew that that's going to affect the vasanas. That's why there's a focus in Vipassana on Vedana, which means the senses, and so a focus on that sensory level where the impulses of life are influencing our physical and psychological reactions to life. And a lot of people say, well, where's the strict science and this and that behind that? Practice it for long periods of time and see how it actually affects your reactions and actions in the world. And I don't just mean going to a Goenka retreat, I mean practicing Vipassana meditation every day, not just obviously going to a Goenka retreat is like shock therapy for consciousness, because you have to spend 10 hours a day meditating for 10 days. So it's 100 hours meditation in 10 days, and that's probably more than most people have practiced in their whole life. But if you implement a 45-minute routine in the morning and a 45-minute routine at night sometime or in the afternoon of Vipassana, then this is going to affect your it's going to transform your samskaras. Then, and the way that the evidence of that, only you can verify through your vasanas. It doesn't matter what a scientist says to you. If you are bearing the fruit of the practice, that's all that needs to be said. And Tai Chi is another one, right? Tai Chi works on the Tai Chi Chuan works on the fight or flight response. So it's working on the sensorium as well. You're working on the deep sensorium about, we live in a world now where the fight or flight response is kind of stuck in the on position, because we're constantly on Twitter and Facebook and all of these things, and like constantly engaged. Like we still think we're walking in the savannah in Africa as part of our evolution. But we don't need that sense of survival and that sense of fight or flight stuck on all the time. So these practices are basically trying to turn the off switch on, come back into the parasympathetic nervous system, which then heals from a scientific perspective, it heals cognitive impairment that we have in our mind, So instead of being in the sympathetic nervous system, of always being active and engaged and fearful of what someone's going to say or think about you, you just shanti. You just become quiet. Your interior becomes quiet, which then allows you to see deeply into those unresolved wounds and that pain, which then allows you to, make some connections with how you've been behaving and your reactions and your general being in the world,
So from that kind of practice, that sensorium level, which it was in our like a subconscious mind, become conscious.
Yeah.
And we begin to cognitively recognize these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So physically, we become more sensitive.
Yeah.
Through intense practice, and that'll reflect on our inner world.
Exactly.
It becomes more vivid and more aware in your conscious mind, which you weren't aware in the past.
Your sensitivity to the world, as you said, becomes more heightened. Your experience of life is a heightened sense of experience. You don't become a stone Buddha, you become more intrinsically sensitive to the world, And as you know with myself, like when you do have, in some sense, a clean emotional center, you can be moved by a lot of things, As you know, I'm bloody crying at all sorts of funny things, but you feel moved by certain, but just there's an energy that you're moved by that it doesn't need to be intellectually analyzed. It's just you're cleaning, you're in a sense cleaning out your emotional center, which actually makes it more alive and sensitive to the world.
You have much more of a deeper connection with much more subtle realm.
Yes.
And your emotional center becomes much more pure, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not you're not an emotional person anymore, but your emotions are fully in tune with life. Because, like an emotional person, for example, is someone who is influenced by their beliefs and their habits and their agendas, right?
And they react to something that's not
Yeah.
Not on the same level as what you think.
Exactly.
Then you just become very defensive and aggressive.
So you're an emotional person.
Yeah.
In the worst sense of the word. But when your emotions are fully alive and vibrant and sensitive to the world around you, then your experience of life is very vivid, And this is how actually you cultivate positive samskaras. Because it's not like the subconscious disappears when you start to resolve all those unresolved wounds and pain. And this is what they explain actually in Eastern spirituality. In some sense you have to cultivate good samskaras. So that'll influence your vasanas and your karma in a good way. And when I say good samskaras, I'm not talking about from a moral view. I'm talking about harmonious dispositions in the self. So more peaceful, like a peaceful psychology, shanti, like cultivating peace in the mind, which is what we need. So having a focus on the things that are natural to human beings, and which a lot of us don't think about. So, for example, like if we look at Mencius, the great Confucian, but we definitely a Taoist, mentioned that innate within us we have empathy, compassion, forgiveness, and a propensity to seek peace because peace is our nature. But for some reason we're so attracted to drama because of our our evolutionary growth, which there was a lot of conflict in the world and so forth and so on, not just individually but collectively, and there has been still. But we have these innate tendencies and we can't ignore those. Mencius uses the boy in the well analogy, where the boy is close to the well, and what's your feeling if the young boy is just about to fall in the well? We all have a sensation in our body. It's a natural
gut feeling.
A gut feeling that we got to save that kid, man. We can't let that kid fall down that well. He's going to die. And it's not a moment of debate. It's not a moment of analysis. It's a natural instinct we have. And he articulates that story because he's saying our natural instinct is towards empathy and forgiveness and compassion. And this is why we feel so great when we actually exhibit those tendencies, because they are natural to the human psychology. But we often fall into these terrible habits that divide the human race, as opposed to bringing harmony. And so you can only get to that stage again, getting back to what we're talking about, is when we start to look into our samskaras that don't confuse our reality. And we don't commit spiritual bypassing, we don't use things to avoid our psychological reality, So once we do resolve those wounds, then you start to feel that sense of empathy and compassion and forgiveness for others, and you do have a sense of a holistic view of the world too. You stop seeing the world so subjectively.
And in a categorized way too, we stop seeing that way.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's you're not cutting the world up into categories and because categories and compartmentalization in the world don't really exist. They exist from a point of view that we've agreed upon that in society, and that's part of socialization. But those things are artificial boundaries and borders and limitations that we've imposed on ourselves. And we've all agreed upon for whatever reason, and we never think deeply about, because we haven't looked at ourselves deeply. We've come into the world and we accept an external model of the world as if that's the be-all and end-all of everything, but it's not, you know. We should be brought into the world and we should understand what you and I are talking about here, the Eastern science of mind. We should be understanding the psychology of ourselves. And we should also be taught about the psychological domain, you know, like how to deal with trauma, how to look into your subconscious and expose certain ways that you're behaving, and also learning the meditation practices and the, you know, the aspects of looking into your mind, you know. Studying maybe even Western psychotherapy, you know what I mean, just to get an idea of studying Jung, especially Jung or Freud or you know, Adler and these guys, you know, study those great Western psychologists, psychotherapists, and gain more tools of how to deal with your psychological reality, psychological domain, you know.
I find it that all these things that we need to actually do, like dealing with our shadow mind and whatnot, is like a kind of constant. It has to take place constantly. It has to be kind of ongoing practice, because we always, everyday life, we accumulate new things in our subconscious mind, right? And it doesn't mean that it's all been cleaned out because you've done intense practice for, let's say, like 10 days Vipassana course. That should just be kind of an introduction to this big project.
Yeah, lifelong project.
Yeah, lifelong project. And again, more we get to do it, I think it becomes easier as well. Yeah, you develop the ideas of how you yourself are like, for example, like personally, like, and you get to learn about yourself much more from the process. And again, that this practice is like ongoing. It's a lifelong project.
Yeah, and you know when you have been influenced by a shadow. We all know. So the way that we react in certain ways in certain situations, and then you go back and because you don't feel right when you react in those ways, right? You look back at it and you go, oh, I didn't have to react that way, you know, like what was the cause of that? It wasn't just the other person being foolish, because, you know, there are fools in the world, you know, people are foolish, but when we are on this path, we have to, in a sense, look at the way we also react and encounter certain situations. Could have we dealt with it better? Why did we deal with it that way? You know, and yeah, this is exhibited most when people become or fall prey to spiritual bypassing, because they'll react a certain way and this and that. They then have to look back at that experience and say, you know, what's unresolved here? Like, there's obviously a tendency or something that's unresolved, because someone who has transcended the mind or transcended the I, the person, doesn't react that way. They're kind of, you know, free of karma, because they're free of all of that shadow, and it's all been, you know, the basement's clean, it's dusted out, and if anything, they're only cultivating harmonious dispositions in the self. They're not, you know, they're not accumulating any more karma, because first of all, they don't have a vested interest in the world anymore, and they're not trying to, you know, acquire an agenda or influence anyone any other way. And that's the problem, again, I think, for a lot of people who commit spiritual bypassing, is they still, and I spoke about this just before, but even though they practice mindfulness or Tai Chi or whatever, they still have a vested interest in how the world should be. And this is going to continue to, you know, fuel your samskaras, but continue to keep them alive, but also continue to add new samskaras, which is going to continue to, you know, put fuel on the fire, right?
Yeah, also like even, energetic level, you keep putting your energy into that way, so that kind of energy will come back around to you.
Exactly.
Isn't it? Mm.
Well, the Advaita Vedanta, or the Vedanta perspective of how to transform the samskaras, which we haven't spoke about, is you have to reverse the cycle of samsara, the wheel of samsara. So you have to see how you act, right? So I reacted like this to Gayam. And I went away, and I have to know that I didn't need to react that certain way. Like, even though I may think and try to justify that you said something silly to me, and I reacted a certain way, but surely I could have reacted better, right, to the situation. So what we do in Vedanta is you start from the outside and you work your way in to transform the samskaras. So instead of vipassana, when you're just trying to quieten the mind, you look into the sensorium. What you're doing here is you're working on the outer layer. You're working on the layer of karma and vasanas. So this is where you practice viveka and vairagya. So viveka meaning the discrimination between the real and the unreal. So this is, again, a heightened perspective and actually an important element of self-inquiry, because you're observing your subconscious reaction. And this is difficult, right? Because a lot of our subconscious reactions are unconscious. So we're unconsciously reacting to certain situations, which is beneath the level of our conscious mind, which can make you look like a fool sometimes.
We realize when it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah. Your foot's already in the mud. You're like, oh, damn it. I look like a damn fool. I can't get out of this one. So this is a really heightened level of practice, because you're trying to catch it, and it's beneath your level of consciousness. So that's the practice of viveka. And the way that we heighten that practice of viveka is through, obviously, meditation and through self-inquiry. And again, this is something that people need to understand when they start. See, people, again, we've mentioned this earlier, but people think self-inquiry is just simply just looking at the eye. It's much more vast. You know, they only look at the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, but they don't look at the teachings of Shankara or Gaudapada. They don't even read the Vedas or the Upanishads. There's vast literature out there to understand all this. And so you need to practice viveka. And when you begin to, what enhances viveka actually is vairagya, as I mentioned before, is this non-reactiveness and this kind of renunciate attitude towards the world. So your view from here on in is like, I'm not going to react to the world. I'm not going to contribute more to the drama because there's too much drama. What is the point of me as this little individual contributing to the drama? There's other people contributing to it. Why do they need me for? There's enough. There's enough, right? We don't need more. So you've drew a line in the sand. You said, I'm staying here and I'm practicing shanti, practicing peace. Because the only way that there can be a peaceful world is if I practice peace. You know, this was kind of an attitude that was emphasized within the Course in Miracles, right? Which kind of revolutionized a lot of New Age thought. And so I'm practicing peace. So I'm not reacting to the world. And that vairagya is then applied to your vasanas. You know, I'm not reacting to my tendencies and my habits, which are fueling my thing. But see, they both go together, right? Viveka and vairagya go together, because you've got to be able to discern and discriminate between these samskaras that are bubbling up as vasanas. So you're kind of discerning between what's, in some sense, a natural reaction to certain situations, a spontaneous natural reaction, which is unclouded by personal agenda and samskaras, as opposed to ones that are clouded by that. And so, but the more that you practice that, and see, that's a practice that we all can practice every day. It doesn't require meditation, but it requires you to always be meditative of your mind. So to be to be aware of your mind. And this really gets people afraid, because they're like, oh man, that sounds hard work to be, because it is hard work, right? Because you have to be aware, and it does have a significant effect on your ego, because sometimes in some situations your ego is like, oh, I want to kill this guy, you know what I mean? But the best course of action, as Ramana would say, is to remain silent and to just observe the vasana, to observe that strong vasana that's like, ah.
It's almost like from practicing viveka and vairagya, it just burn that stuff away.
Yeah.
Like just burn it away.
That's what they say about it. It's like throwing the flame the match onto the house, and the house is made of straw, and so you're just burning it up. That's why they say in Vedanta this is like a sort of like a you're holding a flamethrower, you know, like you're just trying to incinerate it as quick as possible. But that's really an intense path, and it, you know, horses for courses, right? Like if you want to practice Vipassana or even other Zen practices, or you want to practice what we just mentioned with Vedanta, there's horses for courses. But that, I think, actually should be implemented even if you are practicing Vipassana. You should be reversing that wheel, you know.
And keep observing
Yeah.
the vasanas,
Yes.
so that it doesn't get triggered
Triggered, yeah. Because you're trying to, in some sense, you're trying to resolve all these things that you have. And, you know, we can't get too airy-fairy and new age about this. You know, the subconscious is so dynamic. It's not that you're going to, you know, it's not like you're in a laboratory and you're looking at that traumatic experience and you're like, oh, so that's why. And then you can, it doesn't work like that. You know, that's why in Eastern spirituality, they don't delude you into that sort of sense of thinking. You need tools to, in some sense, sweep it out of your subconscious. You know, it's not that you're gonna have resolved every single little thing. You know what I mean? But you're resolving, in some sense, the powerful things in your samskaras that have been influencing your reality for far too long. You know, because especially with what we were talking about, with the reversing of the wheel of samsara, is you're addressing those powerful samskaras, because, you know, those are the ones that are constantly feeling a being. And the tough thing about them is that they're so nuanced and so detailed that if you were to trace back your life, right, in some sense there are a lot of samskaras that we can't even trace back to what the origin of those traumatic experiences. Some of them may have been before we were even conscious. It may have been an experience you had when you were 3. You know, for example, you know, up until around 4 or 5, as they say, your subconscious is completely turned on without the conscious mind. So in some sense, you're just accumulating all of this experience unfiltered. And then next minute, you know, you have a samskara for life and you don't even know how you got it. So even if you were to inquire into the nature of this unresolved wound or this pain, you may not come to the conclusion. So the best way to approach that is maybe to just throw the or get the flamethrower and just torch it.
Yeah, a lot of the times that revealing the very cause of the traumatic reaction can heal the wound of the mind. But like you said, sometimes that it's not even possible, because it's so it's very mysterious actually how you have these tendencies, so that it's better to just cut them off without trying to find why and the very origin of the cause of it. Sometimes.
Well, the promise that Vedanta offers is that if you do just practice this, it's just going to torch them all. It doesn't matter. Like if you sit there and analyze it or whatnot, you're just going to it's gone, it's evaporated, it becomes ash. You know what I mean? Like it's Shiva at his best. You know, Shiva's doing his work, burning all the samskaras up, and all that you're left then is just, you know, a tranquil mind, crystal clear consciousness, pure consciousness. And so, and we all know on an individual level, actually, to get to what you're saying, we all know on an individual level what are actually the experiences that deeply influence us, the ones that have been traumatic experiences, because we can recollect them on a conscious level. But the way they affect us is on a, you know, there's a lot of things that have happened just with that one experience, right? So you could have one traumatic experience when you were younger, but that experience in itself is multi-layered. So, you know, we focus on the actual event, but that event has had an effect that's pervaded your life and made you act in certain ways and so forth and so on. So in some sense, you know, it's not really the event, it's the way that it's affected us that we need to focus on, you know. So The event, yes, it happened, but that affected the way that we are and the way that we behave in the world, and affected our vasanas, our habits and our tendencies. And so we need to focus on that. Obviously, we need to address the event, but more so, it's more so about us.
What really happened inside us.
Inside you, yeah, exactly.
Not about what happened
Outside.
outside.
No.
The event, the very event of it, yeah.
Because what you're dealing with is yourself.
Yes.
You're like, if you're going to focus on the event, right, there's many things that you have to think about. You have to think about the person who caused you trauma, what they did, why they did it. This is not a court case.
And also that all that kind of things are kind of out of your hands.
It's out of your hands. Yeah.
It's not something that you can change or you can control. It's already happened. And more you analyze, more you become reactive in some sense.
Yeah.
Because you want to kind of blame things and blame those very people or something. So that it can be very counter-effective.
Yes.
Whereas if we were to look into what's really important, which is what happened inside from that event, which is what we are trying to focus on.
Exactly. Because that's what the samskaras are. It's the effect of the event. The event evoked the effect. It was the cause, but you're the living effect of that event. You know, the cause you can't help. You know what I mean? You can't help why people are foolish and a-holes and why they intentionally hurt us or anyone or unintentionally hurt us. You can't really analyze that. That's life, right? People are unpredictable, and that's things that, as an adult, that's what we have to deal with. People are unpredictable. We learn this pretty quick when we become adults, right? Because we deal with people and we think, we may learn this actually as teenagers too, where we see, you know, the way people behave and so forth and so on. And so, you know, if you're an intelligent person, you learn to then inquire more inside and in some sense, you know, at least be conscious of what's going on out here and not trying to, you know, fall into any of those other, any situation that could evoke another event that could produce another samskara. So this is why vairagya is important, right? When you're practicing you have a renunciate mentality, the possibility of events happening in your life are, you know, few and far between. The event in your life may be that your dal is a bit late. Oh, my dal's supposed to be here at 2:00. I wanted to eat at 1:00, you know. This is not going to produce a hectic samskara unless you have a personal problem with the delivery driver. You know, so, you know what I mean? But so these events are very, like, they don't produce any samskara. So, I mean, if they do, it's not anything that's going to affect your being. So I think that, and one of the problems in psychotherapy, Western psychotherapy, is a lot of people, when they go to a psychotherapist, they want to look a lot at the event and they want to point the blame. And I sympathize with them, because when there are certain situations where people are acting foolish, they should, in a sense, be blamed for what they've done. But the problem is foolish people often never have an admission of guilt. They are foolish because that's what foolish people do. They don't admit their guilt. They never want to be wrong. You know, you have to get used to that. You live in a world, in some sense, where there are a lot of people who are a-holes. And as a person on the spiritual path, your responsibility is to, you know, inquire into yourself, you know. So actually, when people do go and see a psychotherapist in the West or in the East, is the psychotherapist will focus more on the person, you know. Why is this affecting you so much still 20 years down the track, and so forth and so on. And yeah, sure, some things can be healed, right? Like, say if you approach, if a person close to you had hurt you 30 years ago or something like this and you're still affected, you can approach that person and try to resolve that wound, and in that reconciliation there can be a lot of healing. We know that, right? But there are a lot of people, as I said, who are foolish and never admit their own guilt and this and that. You and I both have experienced this with family members. And so the only way that you can deal with that is to work on yourself, because you can't, in a sense, well, you can't reach that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also not everybody is that lucky.
Not everyone's that lucky. No.
Yeah.
Sometimes you encounter people who are very, you know, they admit things about themselves, very mature, that they made mistakes and so forth and so on. But, yeah, like you said, not everyone's that lucky. We encounter a lot of a-holes in our life, and you have to navigate through it, you know what I mean? But, yeah, you can't focus too much on, and can't play the blame game, as you said, because that's going to just tie you in knots, because you're going to always want to, you know, we've all been in situations where someone has been obviously wrong, right? They've done something so stupid, but they never admit that they did it because they want to save face. They don't want to admit they did something wrong to save face, because they don't want to let you have, in their eyes, something over them. You know, this is the weakness of human psychology, right? Because this is a survival mentality where everyone's trying to play this game of one-upsmanship, you know. And so you don't want to even engage in that, because, like...
But again, like, if we were to be in that blaming game, that doesn't really benefit ourselves in the end.
No.
I don't think, because... Again, if that person is not going to admit their own problem, then you have to just let that be, and you need to just focus on what's really important. Otherwise, you're just gonna spend a lot of energy and time, and you'll be emotionally very spent as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've probably all been in a situation where someone's done something wrong, right? And then you have exposed them for what they've done wrong, and then you really had a go at them and this and that, and they have admitted their guilt. But then, because you went over the top, you yourself turn into the a-hole. You know, so we've all probably done that, had that experience. But that's very rare, as opposed to the other one where people won't admit won't admit their guilt and won't admit they did something wrong. So, but that's the path for all of us who are on this spiritual path.
Yeah.
An aspect of spiritual bypassing we haven't spoke about yet is how it's related to, in some sense, the get it now fast food culture that we live in the modern world. And it's no surprise that spiritual bypassing has become a big problem within spirituality in the last 30, 40 years, because we live in this now fast food. I want it now. I don't want to do any work. I want to get it now. In some sense, you want enlightenment for free, right? This is a topic I talk about in my book, Enlightenment Now, how it's related to that, you know. So everything we spoke about in this podcast, especially in relation to the Wheel of Samsara framework, is that it requires a little bit of work, you know. I mean, you need to tend the garden a little bit for the flowers to blossom.
It's quite an intense process, and you need to kind of put quite a bit of focus into it to get the result that you want.
Exactly.
It's not for free at all.
Well, as you and I know, one of the problems here is that a lot of people hear like Zen stories, or they hear the story of Ramana Maharshi or someone like this who had attained enlightenment just like this. And everyone says, why not me? Why not me? And it's like, there's a lot of things to think about, you know what I mean? Like, you look at the story of Ramana Maharshi, and like, it's not that he wasn't living a life of turmoil and this and that, you know what I mean? He had people around him who were schooled in Vedanta and this and that. So the soil had already been tilled, and then the flowers blossomed as in that time that they did. This is what grace is, right? Grace. When people say, "When will I be enlightened?" It's like, you just need to let grace take its course. You know, it's something that's part of the universe. You know, like,
let your grace to be in your life.
Yeah.
You allow it to be there.
Exactly. And your enlightenment or the dissolution of the personality, that's also a process of grace. The universe's grace. And that timing doesn't equate to your watch, your ego's watch. You know what I mean? You want things to happen now.
Now.
You know, And so when they hear that, oh, we can be enlightened now, like enlightened, and my book, Enlightenment Now, you know, obviously you need to read that to get a better context. And, you know, subtitle, Liberation is Your True Nature. But you need to read the whole book to get a deeper context of what we're talking about. But, you know, people want the enlightenment now. They want the realization now, because that's what Eastern spirituality promises, that you can get enlightenment in an instant. But then next minute you have to spend 12 years in an ashram. So it's paradoxical. But again, you just don't understand Eastern spirituality. You don't understand the philosophy, the tenets, the psychology, which we've been going into a lot. And so this is part of spiritual bypassing, because people, you know, they don't want to do the work. They don't want to do the work. You know, it's actually frightening for them to look at their own mind, to look at their own psychology, to look at their own samskaras, to expose their habits and their tendencies. Is very frightening for people. So they build the scaffolding where they put the inquiry up here, and they leave all of this unresolved. And then they say they're enlightened, but as we've spoke about a lot, you see them, how they react in the world and this and that, and they haven't done any deep psychological work. And there are stories in the East that you can actually be enlightened, but have all these unresolved things, but they don't bother you. You see? But the problem is when they bother you, you know. So that's a whole different kettle of fish there, you know. Like, so most of us are bothered by our unresolved wounds and our pain, our repressed pain. So that's an important perspective, I think.
Yeah, and another thing is, I think that people, a lot of people take this spiritual path as in like a badge of honor sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they would like to somewhat show off to other people that how spiritual individual they are, and also what kind of spiritual practice that they do and things like that, to promote their self-image to other people. And that means that these individuals never really fully understood how it's like to be on the spiritual path.
Yeah.
Like, they just want to fulfill this persona, the social perspective, and they want these spiritual badge of honor type of thing. So then I think then you kind of miss the whole point.
So their view is still external.
Well, yes.
And they're driven by materialism, right? So their form of spirituality is, as you said, is superficial. It's superficial. It's how we look, how we appear to other people. It's still driven by that. It's not like what Lin Chi's talking about. We're being super ordinary. Don't try to be anyone like, because that's an indication that you're still driven by materialism. Oh, maybe I should get now a tattoo of the Buddha on me, or maybe I should grow dreadlocks, or maybe I should do this and that to showcase my spirituality. No. If you want to do those things, do it from a pure place. Do it from just, you know, without influenced or without being driven by what the external reality you think needs to judge you by, you know. So people have this extroverted or external view of spirituality, especially Eastern spirituality. And it's like, no, just be ordinary. Just be simple. That's what Eastern spirituality is actually teaching you to do. Be ordinary, be simple, be no one special. Because when you come back to that place, then you have these deeper understandings, and it allows you to work on a deeper level. This, having a superficial aspect to your spirituality, will continue to suppress the things that you're not addressing. You're just dressing up your sense of spirituality, and you're trying to make yourself look a certain way to other people. Oh, I practice meditation now. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Like, you know, it's still ego-driven. It's still based on the jiva. Who is the I practicing meditation? There's no I in meditation, if you're practicing it properly.
Just meditation.
It's just meditation. Your nature is meditation. The person is someone you do. Meditation is who you are.
Yeah, so that we could say that spiritual bypassing happens when individuals don't fully understand what spiritual practice is.
That's why I tried to emphasize at the start, it's a wrong use of spiritual practices and understanding of the beliefs. The wrong understanding. You know, it's not just the practices and the belief, it's the wrong use, which has to be emphasized. So, for example, if you're not trained in Advaita Vedanta, then the likelihood of you falling prey to spiritual bypassing is pretty high. You know, and this is why. And look, see, this is a result of having Eastern spirituality exposed to a large population, right? Is that, and you know, you and I are doing this too because we have this podcast, but there are people out there who want to learn this stuff. But the byproduct of this is that, and this is that there can be wrong understandings and misinterpretations of the knowledge because you're not sufficiently schooled. And this is why, especially the esoteric paths of Advaita Vedantas and Taoism and these sorts of paths were done in closed circles, and it was an initiation, path of initiation. The master had to see you were really sincere and you had an aptitude for this knowledge, you know, as opposed to giving it freely to everyone. This is why in Hinduism, jnana, the path of knowledge, was kept in closed circles where bhakti and karma is practiced by the general populace. Not that jnanis don't have a sense of bhakti and karma, of course they do. The way that they teach and disseminate satsangs and this and that is part of karma yoga. It's an action to teach. And they do have a love of Shiva or Vishnu or you know, or even Brahman. And so, you know, this is part of the problem, right? So you had it in closed circles, but then next minute, you know, there's the internet, there's the advent of mass media. So then we had the counterculture, we had all of these things, and obviously the counterculture contributed to a lot of spiritual bypassing because a lot of people didn't have any clue in the West about Eastern spirituality. Next minute you had Daisetsu Suzuki giving lectures in America. You had, you know, Ram Dass going to India and then coming back and talking about his experiences and Watts and, you know, some of the greats of our time. But then you had people who went from 0 to 1,000. So they had no understanding of it to like, actually, this is great what I'm hearing. And that is great that they got exposed to it, but they're not getting exposed to the other things they need to learn, which is what we've been talking about today, you know.
I think it seems like somewhat people rush into it, like even that meditative state of mind, the pure, peaceful mind that people experience through taking psychedelics too, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And that's kind of a fast track to it. But the problem is that nothing wrong with having those experiences. But the problem is that people take these substances and have those experiences, and then when they become sober, they act as if they know everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And they act like they are on spiritual path just from having that kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very incorrect manner to approach Eastern spirituality. Yeah.
Well, you're still driven by the ego, right? You're a know-it-all. I mean, you're supposed to be dropping things, following the spiritual path. You're supposed to be unlearning. You're learning, but you're learning to unlearn, to disentangle your mind from the world. Because our mind is entangled with the reality, so we're trying to untangle that and get back to the nature of who we truly are. And so if you're having these experiences and you're, in some sense, fueling your ego to be even stronger and more, extroverted and so forth and so on, then you're still influenced by that. And that again comes with not having the right training and not studying sufficiently. You know, study is important. A lot of people say, "Oh, we shouldn't study and this and that," but they're saying that from that place. You know, why is it that the great teachers who have studied a lot and have come to who have studied all of the whatever path they follow, and they can articulate this and that, why are they held up as enlightened beings? You know what I mean? Follow that path. Follow, the path of jnana, path of knowledge. But that path is also requires jhana, requires meditative absorption, meditation, and so forth and so on, So we're making, again, as you mentioned earlier, we're making it into like spiritual people like this in a box, and it's like, no, it's not like that. And if you're thinking like that, you have no idea what spirituality is. Each and every one of us on an individual level have our own maturing process. This is why Ken Wilber, he talks about spiritual maturity. So this maturation process we all go through, which is not similar for each person. It takes some people, it may take 12 years in an ashram. Someone, it may take 7 days. That's just the nature of this consciousness, this localization of consciousness that we all have. Some of our signals are fully attuned to Brahman, and some of our signals are attuned to Maya, more to Maya. So then it takes a little while to get a new subscription. So your subscription is fully like to Maya television, but you're trying to log into the Brahman broadcast.
Yeah.
But you've invested so much in that. So so other people it comes very natural. Some people it doesn't. The whole path is to realign that signal, and the antenna, in some sense, is your psychology. So the more that your antennas move to there, the more that you're getting the signal, then you can work on a deeper level. Then you can understand the nature of the universe, or the nature of your own localization of consciousness. And so, that's the path we're all on.
Yeah, that understanding is very important, that every individual has different, let's say, different personality, different upbringing whatsoever, different tendencies, different reactions on things. And so we need to take that account, that it's not same for everybody. This spiritual journey isn't same for everybody. And actually categorizing the spiritual person or spiritual path is actually very dangerous somewhat, because you can trap you in a certain way, and it can give you very delusional idea on things, which is very untrue. So we need to understand that how everybody has a different journey. Well, again, destination is same for everybody, right? But which way we can get to is, we don't know which way you're going to go through.
Some people have to walk through a swamp. Some people walk on a paved road. It comes down to the samskaras that you've accumulated in life. Like, to use an example, a very clear example is take a politician who was in their 70s or their 60s or their 70s, who have worked in, the field their whole life. Their whole life has been designed on separation, been designed on left and right and wrong. And then next minute, you introduce Vedanta to them at 75 or something. Here you go. That's going to take a while. Do you know what I mean? It's going to take a while, because their whole samskaras are so alive with separation, and their whole vasanas are habitually trained towards separation and to having opinions and to debate and this and that. And if you're following the path of Eastern spirituality, you need to be avoiding debate, you need to be avoiding having an opinion. Do you see? So it's going to take them a long while.
And if it took them 70 plus years to have that self-image of themselves, then it is going to be pretty difficult to break down. It will eventually, if you put a lot of effort to it. But yes, it's not going to be easy at all.
This is why some ashrams in India and Nepal, Vedanta ashrams, they won't accept man or woman over 30, because the samskaras are too strong, especially for someone who's 75. So that the chances, from their perspective, is that the chances of transformation is slim to none. Do you know what I mean? But if you're under 30, you may have had a little bit of a working life by that time, but you haven't formulated, well, most of us haven't formulated a strong view of how the world should be, an opinion of how life should be, and so forth and so on. And also, we don't have a strong sense of samskaras. We do have samskaras at the 30, there's no doubt. 20, doesn't matter. 10, you have samskaras.
Yeah, but not as strong.
Not as strong as 75, you know. So that's one reason why, you know, they do that. But in some sense, a 75-year-old still has a chance, you know. But they can't go into an ashram or a monastery the way that they are. They have to go in and just remain quiet. The master, whoever attends to them, has to put a self-imposed silence on them. You need to be quiet now. But no, because silence is another path of directly dealing with the samskaras. Because you're not like, you're not acting, you're not being opinionated, which is affecting your vasanas on a deep level. Your vasanas are like, let me live, let me live. And you're like, oh, I can't. The master told me to be quiet.
It's almost like drug addicts get locked up in a rehab. You're going a bit
mad.
A bit mad.
Bonkers, yeah.
Yes.
Bonkers.
But initially, that's how hard it can be, isn't it?
Yeah. And we're addicted to the drug of the I. You're addicted to the drug of, this is who I am. This is how I act. This is the opinions I have. This, in a sense, is an addiction. The I is an addiction. You know, it is a drug because you are hallucinating through reality. You are seeing the world through your own hallucinogenic lens.
It's very interesting that how the spiritual bypassing is so directly related to the self-image.
Yep.
That people misunderstand the spiritual path, and they practice in a wrong way, and they end up resulting the bypass, which is actually missing the whole core of teaching.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes. And a lot of people don't help this. You know, I mean, we've seen in the modern day when modern people, Westerners and Easterners, when they go to certain spiritual masters, and especially this is rife within the Neo-Advaita perspectives, when they go to a spiritual master and they go, you know, I've had this trauma and this and that, and then the master will say, who is the I that experienced this? And see, that's suppressing what they're talking about. And this goes back to what I was saying about that in some sense, say for example, Advaita Vedanta, it should only be taught in some sense to people who are adept with the knowledge, not freely like you go to a church. It shouldn't be taught like that because this is not the Bible being taught. This is at a super deep level. It's at the deepest, right?
For the people who are really ready to delve
who are
into
ready
it.
for it. Yes, exactly. But if you have still unresolved issues and pain and this and that, you need to go through and you need to explore the Wheel of Samsara framework. You need to begin to clean the basement out before you go to that, you know. And this is what happens because people go to a teacher like that and they say, who is the one? And so that person then continues to practice that inquiry, but the energy of those samskaras are so powerful. And you're not going to defeat them. You know what I mean? Only a very skilled individual, like someone like a Ramana Maharshi, who is detached from society, can overcome that. But if you are a person listening or watching this podcast, you are in society. And you have to deal with people in your family and just circumstances and experiences in general. It's okay for Ramana. He's not dealing with anything. He's up in a cave. Shanti, shanti. Easy to deal with samskaras and so forth and so on. But not if you're listening to this, you know. So, and again, that's actually in some sense part of, especially in Neo-Advaita, that's part of a lot of the teachers' problems, is not only suppressing the pain of the individual, but they're probably also suppressing the pain within themselves because they're not addressing, or they lack an aptitude to deal with the psychological level. But that goes back to the larger issue that I talked about, that Advaita Vedanta is strictly for any spiritual path, even Taoism, right? Even Buddhism. Like, it should only be, in some sense, I'm appreciative that it's taught, that you and I have the ability to connect with our audience and so forth and so on. But there is also the reality that if you don't have an aptitude for it and you are not well schooled in the philosophy and the framework of these traditions, then the likelihood of you falling into spiritual bypassing is almost 100%. Because you're not going to deal with those issues that have those shadow tendencies that we have.
Yes. Actually, and also it's quite easy to bypass too if you're not taught.
If you're not
properly,
taught. That's what I'm saying. We've all, especially all of us who have been on a spiritual path, my life, as you know, I went from 0 to 100 reading the Avadutta Gita and stuff like that without any sort of preparatory stages. I did later, obviously, but then you go in to see teachers and so forth and so on, and the teacher saying who was the one and this and that, and there's all of these other things going on in my mind. And I did, obviously, I'm not going to discount that you don't learn from that. You don't learn from that inquiry. I don't want to be completely, fully that's going to continue to contribute to spiritual bypassing, but it can, and it often does, But someone who may have a high aptitude, maybe like a Ramana, can just go, yeah, who is the one that does that? And it's all over. But most of us don't have that luxury, right?
Yes.
Most of us have had traumatic experiences, and we don't have that luxury that we can just transcend the I, So, but again, if you understand it and there needs to be a smooth approach. And this is where I think that the evolution of stages of your evolution, air quotes, of your being needs to be understood. So you need to go through some preparatory stages before you get into the deeper stuff.
Yes.
And most of us fall into that category. Yeah, so that's pretty much spiritual bypassing in a nutshell, isn't it? It's something we need to understand, each and every one of us, on the spiritual path, and also it's there for us to all expose about ourselves, right?
It's a very important point, because a lot of people are on the spiritual path, but they may recognize something is not going right, and there is no a reference point that could point out, which highly possibly could be spiritual bypassing.
Exactly.
And again, that's why we were very glad when we come across to the book, Robert Augustus Master's book. Yeah, so there is actually someone who pointing this issue out. And wow, that's great. He himself is a psychologist and is on the spiritual path who recognized that problem. And it's a very, very important, if not one of the most important things to be on this spiritual journey.
Definitely. Well, he's studied the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, right? He's been in Tiru for a while and so forth and so on, and he's seen this tendency, especially with Advaita Vedanta students, but it's not just with them as well, it's with Buddhism and Taoism too, that we need to clarify. And again, it's the maturing process. It's about, one of the disappointing things that you and I have seen since I've been doing teaching for a bit over a decade now is that people we met, say, back 2010, they fall off the path because of this. You see? Because it doesn't work for them. They are introduced to self-inquiry, or they're introduced to mindfulness or Tai Chi Chuan or something like this, but they fall off the path easily because they think that it's just too much for them because they're not dealing with all of these other things that are going on. The samskaras are way too powerful. And so that's the saddest thing that anyone listening or you and I could encounter, because they had not been introduced to the actual knowledge that's behind these practices, the philosophy.
Do you think they could do something with their teachers, like the teachers?
Of course, yes, yes. They have been introduced to teachers. Again, one of the problems in Neo-Advaita is it's Advaita Vedanta watered down with no philosophy backing it up. It's not like going to the Vedantic order and learning from Swami Sarvapriyananda or Swami Atmanananda or someone like this. You're going to these, in some sense, self-proclaimed gurus who are just teaching self-inquiry. They're teaching just the practice. Who is the I?
Without addressing philosophical...
Without addressing the framework of the philosophy that is the scaffolding that holds the practice up in the light. This is the problem. And then what those teachers say, who is the one that wants to learn the philosophy and this and that? And it's like, no.
It almost seems like just keep chasing your own tail, going nowhere, really.
And it's a lack of understanding how the human mind operates, So the early Vedantins and the early Buddhists and Taoists, they understood how the human mind operates. The human mind needs a framework to allow the practices to dive deep. Because you have a scaffolding. You understand the samskaras, the vasanas, the karma. You understand it thoroughly. And this is what's driving your life and also driving the suffering in your life. So let's address this as we practice, and then you'll start to feel the I thin out and the dissolution, and then the liberation will be, the moksha will begin to consume your life, and then you won't be bothered. You shanti. Life, you're free of life. You're a jivan mukta. You're a liberated being in this life. And that's you raised a good point. It's part and parcel of also bad teachers.
Because teachers are supposed to guide the disciples through the right path and should be able to offer right bullet points for disciples, which they easily get skipped by. So
instead of like, if someone came to a teacher and they said, I had this traumatic experience when I was a teenager, and it's the samskaras are so strong, the subconscious tendencies, the habits and the tendencies and that are so strong, it's affecting my practice and it's affecting just my whole perception of reality. If the teacher was properly trained, then he would say, let's unpack this a little bit. Let's have a look. What sort of karma are you producing? Well, I'm affecting people in this way and this way and this way. Okay, so we have to taper this back. They have to give them the prescription, So the prescription is the Wheel of Samsara framework, understanding how your psychology works. And then the effect of that is what you experience in your practice, with in this sense, with vichara, with self-inquiry.
In that sense, you will free your psychological burden just completely.
Exactly.
You'll be able to just get rid of the psychological burden that you've been carrying consciously and unconsciously.
Exactly.
And that is, again, a huge part of your spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Once you can be free from it, you can dissociate with that I in the past, then you can finally be free from it, and you can born again as a pure sense of the self.
Exactly. Or in some sense, you've come back to who you truly are.
Well, that's exactly right. Come back to your nature.
Well, it is a second birth, right? So it's a second birth in Buddhism, right? So the Dharmakaya. So it's that second birth. You become the Buddha. You were always a Buddha, but you were born in the body and you had all these problems. This is the Rupakaya. So, but then you've come back to your real nature, your real reality. And in talking what we're saying, that's that bad teachers contribute to people being frightened of Eastern spirituality. Because when you're just focusing on just isolating the I, on exploring the I, but having no philosophical framework, it's completely frightening, because people will go into that. And there has been unfortunately, there has been situations in the past where people have developed mental problems, like schizophrenia and stuff like that. And
Yeah, we have witnessed
those
those cases before.
People have had psychological breaks, breakdowns, and the teacher washes their hands of them, and then, and there has been, unfortunately, there's been people who have committed suicide, and that comes down to not having a proper understanding, and it comes down to thinking that you should have it now. If he has it now, why don't I have it now? It becomes this competition. She's enlightened, I'm not enlightened. What's going on here?
No, that's just absurd.
That's absurd. You're still in the material realm. You're still not focused on yourself.
Yes.
You're supposed to celebrate someone else's realization. Oh man, that's a great boon. We should celebrate your realization.
Yeah, celebrate and be grateful.
Be grateful that there's another enlightened being has come.
That's right.
So that's one reason people are frightened, and they ought not to be, If they are taught by someone sufficiently, who is efficient in the teachings and who is well trained, and also if you have a sense of ease about it, you're not expecting to get results tomorrow. You're in it for life, which is very frightening for other people. People are in their mortgage for life. I have
quite a contrast.
Quite a contrast, right? I'm dedicated to this mortgage. I'll have this paid off when I'm 70. Oh yeah, then you can live now, yeah, and 70, like Confucius. Concentrate on the work now. Get the work done now. And it may take a year, it may take 10 years. But guess what? The shedding process is quite a liberating experience.
Again, I think it comes down to personalities of each individual. For myself, personally, I like challenge. I like to kind of push myself to the limit that how much I can handle, basically.
For sure.
And that is if not the most difficult challenge it is for every, human beings on this world. It's very challenging, and just over time, slowly chipping away kind of feeling. Chipping away, like you said, shedding your skin.
Yeah.
Same thing, like you slowly chip things away from your burdens in your mind, and see where it takes, and see how far you can really go,
Yeah. 100%. Got to be fully dedicated, right? Got to be fully in.
You've got to be in or out.
In or out.
Not halfway.
Not halfway. Halfway is the spiritual bypasser. They're halfway. They're not all in. They're not all out. They're on the cusp. That's
why, like you mentioned, the people who were back in 10 years ago, maybe dropped off.
And they never come back.
Yeah.
They just say it's not for them. It reminds me of the line in Sopranos, when Camilla, forget who she was talking about, Tony Soprano's wife, if those who don't know the Sopranos, but she was like, I like the Zen people, but I don't want to sit there and stare at a wall all day, in mentioning Zazen.
Yeah.
But she doesn't understand the framework, doesn't understand the benefits of Zazen, doesn't understand the philosophy behind Zazen, looking at it from a superficial perspective. And I can sympathize with it. When you do look at people just staring at a wall,
it's quite frightening what's going on in their heads. Yeah.
But there's a whole tranquil process going on, right?
Definitely.
So again, that comes back to not understanding it, and that's what happens with a lot of people. Like you said, 10 years ago, we're talking about people are continually dropping off because they don't understand it. We've had people in the past, you're still doing that. No, it's not something that you just do for like a couple of weeks and...
It's like a membership. It's not like membership, I meant.
Yeah.
Not like membership.
Not like a membership, yeah.
Like
you're not part of a club.
Yeah, you just sign up for 6 months and not sign up. And that's... that's...
When you're into Eastern spirituality, you're a follow one of the paths, you're in, And it's hard to turn... Actually, if you understand it, it's impossible to turn away. Because it's the actual... You're dealing with the actual raw reality as it is, It's not a religion, it's a spiritual process. And that's what people, I think, they don't understand. What we're going through when you follow Eastern spirituality is it's a process, you know. So it's a process of going from the unreal to the real. Some people can do it overnight. Some people can't, you know. A lot of people forget the story of the Buddha. They say, yeah, he did it overnight. But he still had a preparatory process of 6 years of sadhana, you know. And you don't want to also exclude those 6 years. That definitely contributed to the historical Buddha becoming enlightened. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end that there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a great topic, and it's spiritual bypassing. We could
You can just go on forever.
go on
really.
forever because there's just so much to talk about. And for those listening, I guess the best book to read is Spiritual Bypassing by Robert Augustus Masters, and maybe even read my book, Enlightenment Now, because it addresses a lot of the problems with thinking that you can get enlightenment for free right now without doing any sincere work.
Yes.
We're, you know, intrinsically enlightened. That's why liberation is our true nature. But the samskaras don't allow us to experience that just for free. You know, we have that whole psychology and that whole accumulative experience in life that eclipses that. So
We need to clean up the history. Yeah. Like we clean up the computer.
The files on the computer.
Yeah.
You want to get back to the raw hard drive with no files, not even like
empty.
not even Windows.
Yeah.
Back to raw basics.
Yeah.
Going back to, I don't know, what's the old one? MS-DOS or something like that. So you want to get back to something like that. But anyway, yeah, it's a great topic. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed. Hope you're all doing well out there. Hope you learned a lot from today. And we'll see you guys next week.